Hey there, viewers. Before we dive into this shocking revelation, I've got a question for you. What's the weather like where you are, and what time is it right now? Drop it in the comments. It's always interesting to see how far these stories reach. Tonight's story uncovers leaked court documents that expose some terrifying secrets about Diddy, and trust me, what's inside might just change everything. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The leak that shouldn't exist. I wasn't looking for anything. That's the part that still unsettles me the most. If I had been digging, if I had been trying to find something buried in the cracks of the internet, then maybe this would have made more sense. But I wasn't. It was past midnight, and I was half asleep, scrolling through my emails out of habit more than anything else. The glow from my laptop screen was the only thing lighting up my tiny apartment, aside from the occasional flicker from the streetlights outside. My inbox was mostly junk, newsletters I never unsubscribed from, the occasional work email, random spam. Then, right at the top, an email with no sender, no name, no subject, just an empty gray space where there should have been an address. I almost deleted it without opening it, but something about it felt wrong. A blank email, no sender at all. I hovered my mouse over it, hesitated, then clicked. There was nothing inside. No text, no message, just an attachment. A single zip file labeled court_docs_leaked_final JEP. I leaned back in my chair, staring at it. My first instinct was to assume it was some kind of scam, maybe malware. But for what? I wasn't important. I wasn't a journalist or a hacker or anyone who would be sent something secret. But my curiosity was already running ahead of my better judgment. I clicked. The zip file unfolded into a folder. Inside, there were a dozen or so PDFs, each with strange names, strings of numbers, odd letter codes, no real indication of what they contained. The only recognizable words were scattered throughout the file names. Sealed, confidential, restricted. I clicked the first one. It opened to a dense official-looking document stamped with a government seal at the top. It looked like a court filing, but the heading was strange. United States Court of Private Hearings. I blinked. Private hearings? What the hell was that? I skimmed through the first few lines, my eyes catching on familiar words. Plaintiff, defendant, hearing date, Diddy. I stopped. Diddy, as in Sean Combs? I scrolled further, but where the plaintiff's name should have been, there was nothing. Just a solid black bar running across the space, as if it had been manually redacted. I tried to read the paragraphs beneath it, but entire sections were blacked out. Whatever this lawsuit was, someone had gone to great lengths to erase any identifying details. I clicked on another file, then another and another. They were all the same, official legal documents, heavily redacted, all connected to the same sealed case. The filing dates made no sense. One was dated 3 years ago, another from 6 years ago, another from last year, but the case number was the same for all of them, as if this was one ongoing legal battle that had somehow never been made public. I felt something cold crawl up my spine. I wasn't a lawyer, but I had never seen anything like this. A single court case spanning years, involving a high-profile celebrity, yet completely erased from public records. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to slow down. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this was just some random fake document dump. Then I clicked on a sworn deposition. It was given by a man named Victor Harrington. I had never heard of him, but that wasn't what stopped me. It was the date on the statement. June 14, 2018. I stared at it. My fingers froze over the trackpad. Victor Harrington died in 2016. I knew that because I remembered his name suddenly. He had been a producer, a small name in the music industry who had died in a car accident. It had barely made the news, just a passing article about an unfortunate collision. But there he was, giving a sworn testimony 2 years after he had died. My hands felt cold. I scrolled further. His statement was long, detailed, disturbing. It described private meetings, coded conversations, people who were selected for certain events. Some of his words were blacked out, but the phrases I could see made my skin prickle. I was told I had no choice. They don't care about money. They care about silence. About lawsuits. It's about keeping the wrong people from talking. The final line before the page cut off mid-sentence. If this ever gets out, they'll know exactly who. I scrolled further, but the next page was missing. I was gripping the edges of my laptop now. The room felt eerily silent. I clicked back to the main folder. Something about the foldmates started to stand out to me. They weren't just random numbers. They followed a pattern. 2011, Case 93, Alpha. 2013, Case 93, Beta. 2015, Case 93, Delta. It was like someone had labeled them by stages, like the case had been updated every few years, under the same secret filing. Then, at the very bottom, the last file in the folder, 2024, Case 93, Omega P. I hesitated. The final version. I clicked. This one was different, shorter, more frantic. The entire document was only 6 pages long, compared to the hundreds in the other files. It looked like it had been hastily compiled. I scrolled. At the very bottom was a list of names. I only recognized one. It was someone who had been declared missing last year. Next to their name, a signature. But the document was dated months after their disappearance. My mouth went dry. This wasn't just a lawsuit that had been buried. This was something else entirely. Something that should not exist. I reached for my phone without thinking. I had no idea who I was even going to call, but I just needed to tell someone. Needed someone else to see this. That's when my laptop screen glitched. The screen froze, then flickered. The folder blinked out of existence. The zip file deleted itself. I stared at the empty screen, my heart hammering. And then, from my phone, a single notification popped up from an unknown number that read, "Stop looking. Chapter 2. The Case That Vanished from History." I sat frozen for what felt like an eternity, my mind scrambling to make sense of what had just happened. The files were gone, erased as if they had never existed. My laptop was back to normal, the folder nowhere to be found. Even the zip file had vanished, leaving behind no trace of what I had just seen. The only thing left was the message on my phone, "Stop looking." A part of me wanted to listen, to let it go, close my laptop and pretend this never happened, but I couldn't. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, my thoughts racing in every direction. This wasn't some elaborate prank. This wasn't some weird glitch. Someone had sent me those files, and someone had made sure I wouldn't keep them. That meant there was something in them that mattered, something that was never meant to be seen. I moved fast, typing out every detail I could remember while it was still fresh. The court name, the case number, the dates, the odd phrases in the depositions. I didn't trust my memory to hold on to all of it, not with the way my hands were shaking. Then I started searching. I didn't know what I expected to find, but it sure as hell wasn't nothing. I searched for the Court of Private Hearings. No results, not a single mention of such a thing existing. Every legitimate federal court had records, even sealed cases left behind some kind of digital footprint. But this, it was like it had never existed. I searched for Victor Harrington. His name still showed up in old articles about his accident, but nothing else. No business filings, no old social media profiles, no archived interviews. That alone was weird. Usually, even forgotten industry figures left some kind of digital trail, an old LinkedIn page, an outdated credit in a music database, but he was wiped clean. Then I searched for the law firm, the one stamped across every document in the leak, Everett, Dunlow and Associates. That's when things got even stranger. The firm didn't have a website, no business listing, no trace of them in the National Bar Association's directory, but I found them in one place, buried inside legal records for high-profile entertainment lawsuits. Big cases, celebrity names, billion-dollar settlements. They had been involved in at least 6 major lawsuits over the past 15 years, yet there was nothing about them outside of those cases. It was as if they only existed within the legal system itself, a ghost firm that appeared just long enough to handle something messy before fading back into the dark. I kept searching, going deeper, looking at every case they had touched. That's when I saw a name I recognized. Tanya Mills. She had been an artist once, not a superstar, but someone on the rise. I remembered her because I used to love one of her songs. It had gone viral for a while before she vanished. No scandal, no drama, she just disappeared from the industry. No follow-up albums, no tour, no final interview to explain why she was walking away. It was like she had been erased overnight. And there she was, listed as a plaintiff in one of Everett Dunlow and Associates cases. I tried to find any trace of her online. Her name still showed up in old articles, but her official artist website was gone. Her social media pages, deleted. Even mentions of her in old interviews had been scrubbed. I tried looking up her music. The song I had loved so much was still floating around on random YouTube uploads, but her entire discography had been removed from streaming services. Even the Wikipedia page that had once listed her as an artist redirected to a dead link. I was starting to feel sick. This wasn't just about a lawsuit. This was about people being erased. I dug through old music blogs trying to piece together what happened to her. That's when I found a cryptic Reddit thread from years ago. Someone had been asking about her disappearance. The responses were all the same. People speculating that she had retired, moved away, left the industry. But one comment stood out. It had been deleted by the original poster, but the reply was still there. It's not that she left, she was removed, and if you know what's good for you, you won't ask why. I felt a chill run through me. I checked the username. It had been deleted. I sat back, running a hand down my face. How many people had been wiped out like this? How many names had just disappeared from history? I went back to my notes, scanning through the scattered details I had written down before the files were erased. Private rooms, ritual gatherings, the system controls who succeeds and who vanishes. I tried searching for those phrases, but the results were useless. Random articles, conspiracy forums, nothing concrete. But then I thought back to what I had seen in Victor Harrington's testimony. The way his statement had stopped mid-sentence, cut off, as if he had been interrupted. What if the court wasn't just erasing cases? What if they were erasing the people who spoke up? I kept digging, chasing down every name that had appeared in the leaked files. A pattern started to form. One by one, I found their stories. Artists, producers, insiders. Some had suddenly quit the industry, some had died under bizarre circumstances, and some had just disappeared altogether. A few had been publicly labeled unstable, their reputations shattered before they faded into obscurity. And then there were the attorneys. Some had switched careers abruptly, taking jobs far outside of entertainment law. Some had gone missing. Some had died under unclear causes. But none of them were still practicing. It wasn't just the plaintiffs, it was the witnesses, the lawyers, the people who had tried to fight back. I didn't know how deep this went, but I knew one thing. Whoever was behind this had the power to make people disappear, not just from the industry, but from history itself. My head was pounding. I needed something tangible, something that could connect all of this together. I went back to the few scattered notes I had taken on the depositions. There was one in particular I couldn't stop thinking about, the one that had mentioned a location. I flipped through my scribbled words, scanning for anything that looked like an address. Then I saw it. buried within the 600-page deposition a single reference to a place. The Langston estate. I typed it into Google. Nothing. No business, no property records, no history. I ran it through real estate databases, legal filings, old property taxes. Nothing. It was like it had never existed. But I knew it had. Someone had written it down. Someone had been there. I stared at the name, my skin prickling. If the place had been erased, it meant there was a reason. And I was going to find out what it was. Chapter 3. The Readiness Witness Who Knew Too Much. The Langston Estate. A name that should have meant something, but didn't exist in any database, property record, or archived legal filing. The more I searched for it, the less I found. It wasn't just hidden, it had been erased, but I knew it was real because someone had mentioned it in those leaked court documents, buried in a 600-page deposition that should have never seen the light of day. I stared at my screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I had spent the last few hours digging through every online resource I could think of, but I was hitting dead ends. Every time I tried a new approach, the results came back the same. Nothing. I leaned back in my chair, frustrated, running through my options. The leaked documents were gone, deleted from my laptop as if they had never existed, but I still had my notes. I still had fragments of information, pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together yet. I knew there had to be more, something I had missed. I pulled up my notes again and went back to one of the depositions that had stood out to me the most, a sworn statement from an anonymous witness. Unlike the others, this one was different. The writing was careful, deliberate, almost as if the witness knew they had to choose their words wisely. They talked about the parties. Not the kind that made headlines, not the ones where cameras flashed and celebrities posed for the press. These were different, invitation only, no phones allowed, no media coverage. If you got an invite, it meant someone had chosen you, and once you were in, you played by their rules. I skimmed through my notes, my pulse picking up as I read the parts that had unsettled me the most. One of the witnesses described a room where cameras were installed at every angle. Not just a few for security, but hundreds, embedded in the ceiling, the walls, hidden in places no one would think to look. The cameras weren't there to protect anyone. They were there to record. But here was the part that didn't make sense. No one ever saw the footage. There was no security room, no team of guards monitoring the feeds. No recordings ever surfaced. It was like the cameras existed for a purpose that no one understood. Another witness talked about figures in high places, people who ensured that certain individuals never spoke about what they had seen. And then there was the contract. This part made my skin crawl. According to one witness, everyone who attended these private gatherings had to sign something. Not an NDA, not a simple confidentiality agreement. Something bigger. Something legally binding, so deeply buried in loopholes and legal jargon that most people didn't even know what they were signing away. But the ones who did understand, they never spoke about it. The words used in the deposition were vague, redacted in places, but the meaning was clear. This wasn't about keeping parties secret, this was about control. I took a deep breath, staring at the screen. I felt like I was unraveling something that I had no business knowing, like I had stepped too far into a place that wasn't meant for outsiders. But I couldn't stop now. I went back to the depositions, combing through my notes, searching for anything that stood out. And that's when I found it. A name buried in the middle of a testimony, one that had been erased from every public record I could find. Marcus Rowland. He had been a music producer, a rising name in the industry, someone who had worked with some of the biggest artists in the world. Then, suddenly, he vanished. No explanation, no farewell statement, nothing. And here he was, in a sealed court deposition, speaking under oath. I scrolled through my notes, my hands tightening into fists as I read through his testimony. Marcus had been inside. Not as an outsider, not as someone who had stumbled into the wrong place at the wrong time, but as someone who had seen too much. He talked about the contracts, confirming what other witnesses had said. But he went further. He described a specific night, a specific event. He wouldn't name names, but he said he had seen something he wasn't supposed to see. And then he dropped the line that made my stomach turn. Someone tried to expose it. They didn't make it. I swallowed hard. Marcus talked about a meeting that had taken place after that night, where powerful people decided what to do. It wasn't an official meeting. There were no notes, no legal records, nothing that could be traced. But Marcus had been there. He had listened, and what he heard terrified him. They don't erase the truth. They erase the people who try to tell it. The words sat there on the page, a quiet, unspoken threat. I scrolled further. The last page of his deposition cut off mid-sentence. Just like Victor Harrington's. It wasn't just a coincidence, it wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a normal legal proceeding. People were disappearing before they could finish speaking. I flipped to my next note, the final part of the court transcript. A judge had acknowledged Marcus's unfinished testimony, but instead of questioning what had happened, instead of demanding answers, they had ruled it irrelevant. Irrelevant. I exhaled shakily, my entire body tense. Marcus Rowland had tried to tell the truth, and someone had cut him off before he could finish. And now he was gone. I sat back in my chair, my hands gripping the sides of my desk. This was bigger than I had realized. This wasn't just about lawsuits, hidden court cases, or erased evidence. This was about silence. A system designed to erase people before they could speak. I didn't know where this was leading. I didn't know who was behind it or how deep it went. But I knew one thing for sure. Marcus Rowland had been there. He had seen what happened. He had tried to tell the truth. And now he was nothing more than a name buried in a sealed deposition that was never meant to be read. I pushed away from my desk, breathing hard, my pulse thudding in my ears. My apartment suddenly felt smaller, the walls closing in around me. I had started this thinking I was just looking into a strange court case, a legal anomaly, something that didn't add up. But this wasn't a case. This was a warning, and I had just stepped into something I wasn't supposed to find. I reached for my phone, hesitating for a long moment before unlocking it. I didn't know who to call, who to trust. But I had to do something. Because if I didn't, I had a feeling that soon I'd be the one disappearing. Chapter 4. The locations that don't exist. I didn't sleep that night. My mind was racing, replaying everything I had uncovered, every disturbing detail that was never meant to surface. Marcus Rowland's deposition haunted me, especially the way it had ended, cut off mid-sentence, ruled irrelevant by a judge who didn't seem to care that a man had vanished. The deeper I dug, the more I realized that this wasn't just about hidden court cases. This was about places, people, and events that had been erased entirely. And I was about to find out just how far that erasure went. I still had the notes I had scrawled down before the files were wiped from my laptop. Most of them were case references and names, but one section stood out: locations. The leaked court documents had referenced multiple properties tied to Diddy, places where incidents had allegedly taken place, but there was something off about them. None of these properties existed on public record. I started cross-referencing each location against online property databases. Nothing, not a single match. No tax records, no ownership history, no business filings. It was as if these places had never existed. But that was impossible. Someone had mentioned them in a legal proceeding, and you don't file lawsuits over places that aren't real. There were 3 locations in particular that caught my attention. A luxury penthouse in downtown Manhattan, a warehouse on the outskirts of Los Angeles, a secluded estate in upstate New York, the Langston Estate. I decided to start with the penthouse. The address was listed in the documents, but when I searched for it online, there was nothing about a residential unit at that location. The building existed, but according to every source I could find, it was purely commercial, an office tower, not a place anyone lived. I wasn't convinced. There was only one way to be sure. The next afternoon, I took a cab to the building, trying to push down the gnawing unease in my stomach. If this address didn't exist, then why did it show up in a sealed court case? The building looked like any other skyscraper in the city. Modern, glass windows reflecting the sky, the kind of place where high-powered executives spent their days making billion-dollar deals. I stepped inside, blending in with the lunch rush of employees. The directory in the lobby listed nothing above the 25th floor, but according to the documents, the penthouse was on the 40th. I approached the front desk, trying to keep my voice casual. "Hey, I'm supposed to meet someone in the penthouse," I said, watching the receptionist's face closely. She frowned. "There's no penthouse." I hesitated. "But this is 172 Madison, right?" "Yes." "And this building has 40 floors?" She blinked at me. "No, this building has 25 floors." A chill ran through me. I nodded, muttered an apology, and walked out, my mind spinning. The documents had referenced a location that didn't exist, at least not to the public. I was starting to see a pattern. I moved on to the second location, the warehouse in LA. Unlike the penthouse, this one did exist, at least on paper. The address showed up in old city records, but there was no sign that it had been used for anything in the past decade. No business filings, no recent property sales. I booked a flight that same night. I needed to see it for myself. The warehouse sat in an industrial district surrounded by chain-link fences and abandoned lots. I parked my rental car a block away and approached on foot. The building looked unused, but something about it felt staged. The exterior was weathered, but the windows weren't broken. The security cameras were still intact. There was no dust on the doorknob. I walked around the perimeter, my pulse hammering. Someone was maintaining this place. Then, out of nowhere, a voice behind me. "You looking for something?" I turned sharply. A man stood there, dressed in a faded security uniform. Older, maybe in his 60s, but the way he was watching me made it clear he wasn't just some random rent-a-cop. I forced a smile. "Just curious. Used to hear a lot about this place back in the day. Didn't know if it was still in use." His expression didn't change. "It's not." I nodded slowly. "But it used to be?" For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. He hesitated, glancing around before lowering his voice. "You don't want to be asking about this place." I swallowed. "Why not?" He exhaled through his nose. "Because people who do don't get answers, they get problems." A long silence stretched between us. I felt my heart pounding against my ribs. Then, just before he turned to walk away, he muttered, "They used to have events here, high profile. Then one day, it stopped. No announcement, no explanation, just stopped." I opened my mouth to ask another question, but he was already walking back toward his car. I stood there, the weight of his words pressing down on me. People who ask don't get answers, they get problems. I took one last look at the warehouse before heading back to my car. 2 locations, 2 impossible things. And I still had one more left to check. The Lengthen estate. I didn't hesitate this time. I booked a car and started driving north. If the pattern held, this place wouldn't officially exist. The closer I got to the coordinates I had written down, the stranger things became. The roads stopped appearing on GPS. My phone signal flickered in and out. It felt like I was driving into a place that wanted to be forgotten. Then, suddenly, I saw it. A massive iron gate, rusted but still standing. Beyond it, a long driveway stretched through thick trees. I pulled over, stepping out cautiously. The estate was hidden from the road, but I could make out the faint outline of a massive structure in the distance. I approached the gate, my hands gripping the cold metal. Something was off. The air was too still. No birds, no rustling leaves, just silence. Then I saw the filing cabinet. It was old, half buried in the brush near the gate. Someone had tried to get rid of it, but never finished the job. I yanked the drawer open, my fingers shaking. Inside, a stack of old invoices. And then I saw it, a signature. A name I had seen in the leaked documents. A name that had been erased from every legal record. This place was real. And whatever had happened here, someone had tried very, very hard to make sure no one would ever find out. I took a deep breath, gripping one of the papers in my hands. I wasn't supposed to be here. And now I was sure someone knew that I was. Chapter 5. The Unofficial Lawsuits. I drove for miles before I finally pulled over. My hands were trembling on the wheel, my mind looping over everything I had just uncovered. The Langston estate existed. I had stood at its rusted gate, seen the driveway leading into the woods, held a document in my hands that shouldn't have existed. Someone had tried to erase every trace of it, just like the warehouse, just like the penthouse that had no official record, but they had missed something. The filing cabinet was abandoned, but the invoices inside were real. Names, dates, payments. Some of them were stamped, settlement approved, case sealed, with official court insignias. But there was something strange. The cases didn't have case numbers. I hadn't noticed it at first, my mind too focused on the significance of the names. But as I spread the pages out on the passenger seat, I saw the pattern. Every lawsuit had been settled outside of court. Every plaintiff had disappeared afterward. This wasn't normal. Even in high-profile lawsuits, there was always a trail, a filing, a record, a press release, something. But these cases had never been officially tried. They had been buried before they could even be seen. I reached for my phone, my fingers shaking as I typed out the first name on the list. Andrea Caldwell. She had filed a lawsuit against Diddy 5 years ago. I remembered hearing about it briefly, a news story that had come and gone in less than 24 hours. I had assumed it was dismissed or settled out of court, like so many other cases in the entertainment industry. But now, looking at the document in my lap, I realized the lawsuit never officially existed. The case had been handled by Everett Dunlow and Associates, the ghost law firm. I searched for Andrea Caldwell. No social media, no interviews, no sign of her anywhere. I checked old news archives. She had been a singer on the verge of breaking out. Then one day she had just vanished. There was no final album, no farewell statement, just a single tabloid story claiming she had chosen to step away from the industry for personal reasons. I didn't believe that for a second. I searched for the next name. Jonathan Miles. Same story. Filed a lawsuit. Case never made it to trial. Settled by Everett Dunlow and Associates. Disappeared. Then another and another. Every single plaintiff vanished after settling. Not just from the public eye, from everything. I leaned my head back against the seat, my heart pounding. This wasn't about covering up bad behavior. This was about making sure the truth was never spoken. People weren't just signing settlements. They were being erased. I flipped through the pages, scanning for anything that might lead me to someone still out there. Someone who had been part of this system, but had managed to slip through the cracks. That's when I saw a different kind of case. Not a plaintiff, a defendant. The former bodyguard. Unlike the others, he hadn't filed a lawsuit against Diddy. He had been sued by Everett Dunlow and Associates. The reason? Breach of contract. I frowned, scanning the details. He had worked for Diddy for 6 years. Then suddenly he had tried to go public with information. He had contacted a reporter, leaked details about something he had seen at one of the private gatherings. and within 48 hours a lawsuit was filed against him. The complaint accused him of violating a confidentiality agreement, fabricating evidence, and defamation. It had never gone to trial. The case was settled within days. And then, he disappeared. I checked the date on the settlement. It was 3 years ago. I searched his name. Nothing. No records, no social media, no work history. The only thing I found was an old address on a security license from years before. I didn't think, I just started driving. It took me 3 hours to reach the address. The house was small, run down, sitting at the edge of a quiet neighborhood. I parked down the street and walked up slowly, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. If this guy was still alive, I needed answers. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again. Silence. I was about to turn away when I noticed a curtain shift in the window. Someone was in there, watching me. I swallowed hard. "I just want to talk," I said, my voice steady. "I know what happened to you. I saw the case." A long pause. Then, the door unlocked. A man stood in the doorway, gaunt, unshaven, hollow-eyed. He looked like someone who had been hiding for a long time. He didn't say anything at first. He just stared at me. Then, in a hoarse voice, he said, "You shouldn't have come here." I stepped forward. "You're Marcus Glover, right?" His jaw clenched. "Not anymore." I hesitated. "I saw the lawsuit. I know you tried to go public." His eyes darkened. "And look where that got me." I glanced past him into the house. Bare walls, no pictures, no sign of a normal life. "They erased you," I said quietly. He let out a dry, bitter laugh. "Erased is putting it lightly." I took a deep breath. "I need to know. What did you see?" His hands tightened into fists. He didn't answer right away. Then, finally, in a low voice, he said, "They think money fixes everything. They think fear keeps people quiet. But what they don't understand is that some things don't stay buried forever." He looked at me then, his gaze sharp, assessing. I knew he was trying to decide if he could trust me. Then, slowly, he walked to a small cabinet by the wall, pulled open a drawer, took out a single envelope. He handed it to me. Inside was a single piece of paper, handwritten. Just one sentence. "If you found this, it's too late." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I looked up at him. His expression was grim. "They know you're looking," he said, "and if you keep going, they'll come for you too." I swallowed hard. Then I guess I'd better hurry. Chapter 6. The People Who Tried to Speak Out. I barely slept after leaving Marcus Glover's house. His words played over and over in my head, his warnings settling into my bones like a sickness I couldn't shake. "If you found this, it's too late." He had looked at me like I was already dead. I knew what I should have done. Stopped digging, walked away, pretended none of this had ever happened. But I couldn't. I had gone too far, seen too much, and now I wasn't just looking at lawsuits and settlements. I was looking at a pattern of destruction. People who had tried to speak out, only to vanish or meet violent, untimely ends. So I did what I had always done. I kept digging. I started by compiling a list of former insiders, people who had once been in Diddy's orbit but had either disappeared from the public eye or died under suspicious circumstances. It was worse than I expected. At first, the names seemed random: producers, assistants, managers, background players. But as I kept going, the pattern became clearer. Most of them had, at some point, tried to talk. I found an old interview from 2009, a producer named Jalen Watts. He had been one of the top sound engineers in the industry, working on some of the biggest albums of that decade. But something had changed. He had given an interview where he said, "There's things I've seen that I wish I hadn't. Things they don't want you talking about." It was vague, cryptic. He didn't elaborate. A year later, he was found dead in his apartment. The official cause? Overdose, but there were no drugs found in his system. His death barely made the news, just another tragedy in the music world. Then there was Lisa Romero. She had been a talent scout, someone who had worked behind the scenes, discovering young artists before they became famous. She had been connected to Diddy's circle for years, until she suddenly quit the industry entirely. A few months later, she posted a cryptic tweet. "They make you sign things, but paper won't keep you safe." That tweet was deleted an hour later, and within a week she was gone. The official story was that she had moved overseas, started a quiet life somewhere far from the industry. But there was no proof of that. No travel records, no bank activity, no sign that she had ever left. She had vanished. I kept searching. More names, more sudden disappearances, more tragic deaths labeled as accidents or suicides. But there was something even stranger. Some people hadn't vanished completely. Some were still alive, but changed. I found an old assistant, Jason Clark. He had been close to Diddy's inner circle in the early 2010 SS. Then one day, he was fired. He had tried to sue. Everett Dunlow and Associates had handled his case. The lawsuit never made it to trial. It was settled in days. Jason Clark was never heard from again. No social media, no interviews, no new jobs. Until I found something buried deep in an old archive, a local news segment from 2016. It wasn't about him, it was about a psychiatric facility in upstate New York. Jason Clark's name was on the patient list. Institutionalized. I felt sick. People weren't just disappearing. Some of them were being broken. I didn't realize how long I had been researching until my phone buzzed, a blocked number. I stared at it. Every instinct told me not to answer. I answered anyway. At first, there was nothing, just silence. Then, a voice. Distorted, warped, like it had been altered. "You need to stop." I swallowed hard. "Who is this?" No response. Then, quietly, "They know." A chill ran down my spine. "Who are you talking about?" Static crackled through the line, then a single phrase before the call ended. "You're next." The line went dead. I sat frozen, gripping my phone, my breath coming fast. Someone knew what I was doing. I turned off my phone, yanked the battery out. I wasn't taking any chances. But I knew one thing for certain. Whoever had called me wasn't a threat. They were a warning. And it was already too late to turn back. I barely slept that night. Every noise outside my apartment made my pulse jump. Every shadow seemed longer than it should have been. By the time morning came, I had made my decision. I was going to talk to someone who had been part of this system and live to tell about it. Jason Clark was in a psychiatric facility. I didn't know if I could get to him. But there was one name I hadn't checked yet. A woman named Naomi Green. She had been a publicist, working with some of the biggest names in the industry. Then suddenly, she quit. No public statement, no farewell tour, nothing. Her name had been buried in one of the leaked depositions, mentioned by someone who had tried to expose what was happening. She was still alive, and I was going to find her. It took me 6 hours to track her down. She was living in a small town in Virginia, far from the industry, far from the life she used to have. I drove through the quiet streets, stopping outside a small, run-down house at the end of a dirt road. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again. Then, movement. The door opened just a crack. A single eye stared at me through the gap. Then, slowly, the door opened wider. Naomi Green stood in the doorway, thin, pale, eyes darting like she expected someone to be watching. I swallowed. "I need to talk to you." She shook her head. "No." "I know what happened," I said quickly. "I know about the settlements, the cases that were buried. The people who... She grabbed my wrist. Her eyes burned into mine. You don't know anything. I opened my mouth, but she pulled me inside, slamming the door behind us. She paced the room, her breath uneven. You think you're exposing something? She let out a sharp, bitter laugh. You think you're uncovering some big secret? She turned to me. You have no idea how far this goes. I exhaled. Then tell me. Her expression twisted, like she wanted to scream, but couldn't. She walked to a small wooden box on a shelf, pulled out an old envelope. She pressed it into my hands. I opened it. Inside was a single photograph. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then my stomach dropped. It was a picture of me, taken that morning. I stared at Naomi, my throat dry. Where did you get this? Her voice shook. They're already watching you. I couldn't breathe. Run, she whispered, before they stop giving you the chance. Chapter 7, The Final File. Section What It Implies. I couldn't move. The photograph in my hands felt heavier than anything I had ever held. The paper was slightly crumpled, the ink slightly smudged, but the image was clear. A perfect shot of me, taken that morning, standing outside my apartment. Someone had been watching me. Not just following my trail, not just tracking my research. They had been close enough to take a picture, close enough to let me know that they could get even closer. I looked up at Naomi, my pulse hammering. Who gave this to you? She didn't answer. She was staring at the floor, her breathing unsteady. Naomi. My voice was sharp, urgent. She swallowed, then finally whispered. It was in my mailbox. No name, no note, just that. I clenched my fists. Someone wanted me to know I was being watched, but more than that, they wanted Naomi to be the one to show me. It was a warning, a psychological game. They were trying to scare me off, and it was working. But fear wasn't enough to make me stop. Not now. I shoved the photograph into my pocket. I need to know what else you have, I said, keeping my voice steady. Everything you know. Everything they tried to erase. Naomi shook her head. You think there's an answer? There isn't. I spent years trying to figure out how deep this went. Do you know what I found? I waited. She exhaled. Nobody knows who's really in control. A chill ran through me. She turned away, rubbing her arms like she was cold. Diddy's just a piece, a big piece, sure, but not the only one. Everyone who gets too close to the truth thinks they're about to expose some massive secret, like they'll find a single person at the top pulling the strings. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. It doesn't run itself. Even the ones inside it don't know where it begins or where it ends. I frowned. What do you mean? She gestured toward the box she had pulled the photograph from. A year ago, someone left me something else, not a picture, a letter. I felt my pulse quicken. A letter? She nodded slowly, then knelt beside the box and pulled out an aged envelope, slightly yellowed with time. She handed it to me. I opened it carefully. The paper inside was thick, expensive, the kind used for formal correspondence, but there was no logo, no return address. Just a single sheet of paper, handwritten. The handwriting was precise, deliberate, almost formal. I started reading. If you are reading this, you are closer than most will ever get, but that does not mean you are safe. You are looking for answers. You won't find them, not the ones you want. There is no single villain, no single mastermind. There is only the machine, and it has been running for longer than you can imagine. Diddy is not the top. Neither is the next one or the one after that. The structure is designed to ensure no one ever sees the whole picture. Even those who believe they hold power are only temporary. You may think you have discovered something new, but you haven't. You are following a path that has been walked before. It always leads to the same place. Some stop before they get there, some don't. If you are wise, you will burn this letter and forget what you have learned. If you are not, then know this. The records exist. Everything that has ever happened, every deal, every erased name, every disappeared soul, they are not lost. They were never lost. They are waiting to be found. I felt a slow, creeping chill spread through my body. I read the last few lines again. The records exist. They are waiting to be found. My hands tightened around the letter. This was it. This was what I had been looking for. Not just scattered pieces, not just hints and whispers. Proof. Somewhere out there, the entire history of this system had been recorded. Naomi was watching me carefully. "Do you understand now?" she said quietly. I nodded. This wasn't just about Diddy. It never had been. He was a player in the game, but the game itself was much, much bigger. And somewhere the evidence was still out there. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my bag. "Where did this come from?" I asked. Naomi hesitated, then shook her head. "I don't know." I frowned. "But someone had to." "I don't know." Her voice was sharp, almost panicked. "It was just there. One day in my house. No one broke in, no sign of forced entry. Just there." A heavy silence filled the room. Then she whispered, "They're always watching." I left Naomi's house just before midnight. The photograph was still burning a hole in my pocket, but the letter changed everything. The records were out there. I just had to find them. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at my phone. I had turned it off after the last call, but now, slowly, I powered it back on. No new messages. No new warnings. I exhaled and typed out a message. "I need to meet." I sent it to Marcus Glover. No response. I tried again. "Marcus, I found something." Nothing. My stomach twisted. I checked the time. 1:04 a.m. Then, just as I was about to put the phone down, a new message appeared. But it wasn't from Marcus. It was from an unknown number. No words. Just a single set of coordinates. I stared at the screen, my heartbeat accelerating. The location was in the middle of nowhere, a remote area, miles away from any major city. They knew I was looking for the records. And now, they were leading me somewhere. I drove through the night, the coordinates locked into my GPS. The roads became emptier the farther I went. Soon there were no streetlights, no gas stations, nothing but endless darkness stretching out in every direction. The deeper I drove, the worse the feeling in my stomach got. But I didn't turn back. I had come too far. An hour passed, then another. The road narrowed, turning into a dirt path surrounded by trees. The GPS said I was close. I slowed the car, my headlights cutting through the thick night air. Then, ahead of me, something came into view. A building. Old, crumbling, but not abandoned. The lights were on. Someone was waiting for me. I pulled the car to a stop, my breath uneven. I had spent weeks chasing a secret. Now I had been invited in. Chapter 8. The Last Leap. The building loomed in the distance, a forgotten structure surrounded by miles of emptiness. It wasn't grand or imposing. It was functional, an old industrial facility with no identifying markers, no signs, no security, nothing to indicate that anyone had been here in years. But the lights were on. Someone was expecting me. I parked a short distance away, heart hammering in my chest. This wasn't some mistake. I had been led here. The anonymous messages, the buried evidence, the photograph left in my mailbox. It had all been building to this moment. I stepped out of the car, every muscle in my body tense, my breath steady but shallow. The ground crunched under my boots as I approached the entrance. The door was ajar. Not wide open, just enough to invite me in. I hesitated. Then I stepped inside. The interior was eerily still. No sounds, no signs of movement. Just rows and rows of metal shelves stretching into the dimly lit space. Files, folders, sealed boxes. The air smelled of dust, aged paper, something artificial and sterile. At the center of the room, a desk, and on it, a single open folder. I swallowed hard and walked toward it. Inside wasn't a legal document. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was a letter, handwritten. The ink had smudged slightly, as if the writer had hesitated. If you are reading this, you are closer than most will ever get, but that does not mean you are safe. You are looking for answers. You won't find them. Not the ones you want. There is no single villain, no single mastermind. There is only the machine, and it has been running for longer than you can imagine. Diddy is not the top. Neither is the next one or the one after that. The structure is designed to ensure no one ever sees the whole picture. Even those who believe they hold power are only temporary. You may think you have discovered something new, but you haven't. You are following a path that has been walked before. It always leads to the same place. Some stop before they get there, some don't. If you are wise, you will burn this letter and forget what you have learned. If you are not, then know this. The records exist. Everything that has ever happened, every deal, every erased name, every disappeared soul, they were never lost. They are waiting to be found. My hands shook as I finished reading. I flipped to the next page. A map. Not detailed, just a rough sketch, hand-drawn. A single location marked with an X. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling as I tried to take a picture. The screen glitched. For a second, everything froze. Then the entire folder disappeared. The desk was empty. The warehouse was empty. Everything was gone. I stumbled back, my pulse roaring in my ears. The shelves that had been filled with documents, now bare. The sealed boxes vanished. I turned sharply, scanning the room. I wasn't alone anymore. A figure stood in the doorway. Tall, still, watching. I took a step back, my instincts screaming at me to run. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. Then, a voice. Low, measured, unshaken. You were never meant to see this. My stomach dropped. I tried to speak, but my throat closed up. The air was wrong. Too thick, heavy. I felt it then. Something in the air. Something invisible pressing down on me, seeping into my lungs. My vision blurred. I took another step back, but my limbs felt heavy, slow, my heartbeat sluggish. The figure stepped forward, reaching into their pocket. Something flickered, small, metallic. I tried to move, tried to run, tried to... Darkness. I woke up on the side of an empty road. Dizzy, nauseous, my head pounding. I gasped in a breath, my hands grasping at the gravel beneath me. The cold air stung my skin. I pushed myself up, my vision swimming. The warehouse was gone. Not abandoned, gone. As if it had never been there. My car was still parked where I had left it. My phone was in my pocket. But the files, the letter, the map, gone. I felt my pulse hammer against my ribs. My mind screamed at me to leave. But when I opened my hand, I felt something crumpled inside. A single slip of paper. Handwritten. Just one sentence. The truth was never meant to be known, but now it can't be forgotten.